and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'd like to move this agenda around a little bit because Justice James Foster has another appointment tonight. So I'd like to move him up and then we'll go to the public hearing and continue with the meeting. So if
Sure.
you and Justice Rosen want to sit, we've been discussing the lease that was proposed by the village. And the last meeting we had, we requested of the village two things: to extend the lease, but also to indemnify the town for the rental of the room to private parties. And I think that that was your suggestion. But we checked with Gary Van Allen at Metswood, who provides the insurance for the village too, and that's not required.
Well, I'm not going to comment on that because that's a question you have to bring to your legal counsel. So I disagree with it strongly, but I'm not going to give you legal advice on how you should negotiate the lease for the.
No, but we wanted to hear what your thoughts were.
So Maria asked me to give you just give you a few thoughts on what's happening at the court. And I feel very strongly that the town needs to work with the village to try to do everything that they possibly can, exert as much pressure as they can to keep the court at the Tracy. And there's a number of reasons for that. Partly because we've looked into all this already. This is not something that we've talked about bringing the court here. We've talked about bringing the court to one of the firehouses. We've talked about building a separate facility. We've talked about finding another space for it. And whether it's for reasons of cost or security or parking or for whatever reason, the Tracy is really the best place for the town and the village court to be. There's another real big reason though why we shouldn't think about building another space for the court. And that reason is that last year the state passed legislation which requires that all defendants be provided with counsel at arraignments, at their initial arraignments. And they haven't implemented this yet, although they've been fits and starts and they've been trying to do it. But this is a very difficult and expensive thing to do. And although there's no formal directive to do this, it appears to me that what's going to happen is that all arraignments are going to eventually be consolidated into city courts in those counties that have city courts, or they're going to be put in probably in county courts in those counties that don't have city courts. And the reason for that is because from the defense perspective and also from the district attorney's perspective, it's easier for them to have one place to go to rather than have to go to all these other places around the county. So even though the original idea was that they're supposed to provide counsel for defendants and that it's supposed to be for the protection of defendants, it's actually, I think the reason that they're doing it is really because they want to make it easier and less expensive and more efficient. It's not necessarily in the defendant's best interest to do that, but they already have a proposal from the chief administrative judge, which is called centralized arraignment parts. And it's already been discussed by many different stakeholders throughout the state. And the idea of centralized arraignment parts is that you would have arraignments in one central place. And they haven't worked out the details, but presumably you would have one time a day, or maybe 2 or 3 times a day, where the judges, they would have judges, and either they would be the city court judges, or they would be town and village judges, probably who are lawyers, that would sit in city court and hear those arraignments. If they do that, I think what they're going to find is that it's very difficult to transfer those cases back to the town and village courts because of paperwork that's involved, because of bail, transferring bail back and forth, because of transportation issues. So if defendants are arraigned down in city court and then they're released, they're going to have to be released. There's going to have this transportation issues that are involved. They're going to have to build holding cells for them down in these places. And all of that's going to make it more difficult to bring those cases back to the town and village courts. So if that happens, and they end up keeping those cases at the city court, which seems to be what they're trying to do because they've already raised the salaries for the city court judges, and they've made them, they're already part of the state system, so they're already getting something like $160,000 a year for a full-time city court judge. So like in Hudson, you have 1 half-time city court judge and 1 quarter-time city court judge. They could easily just make those 2 guys full-time city court judges and have them sit and hear all of those cases. So the other piece of this is that there's already a program that's in place in the state to have traffic diversion programs. And under those traffic diversion programs, instead of people coming into town and village courts for traffic tickets, they're going to one central location, or they're pleading them through the mail. So they no longer go to the town and the village courts. And so if they move all of the criminal cases to city court, and it's not that easy to do because of this in the state constitution, you have to have town and village courts, but they could just leave them without any work to do. So if they move all the criminal cases to town, to city court or county court, and then they move all the traffic cases to traffic diversion parts, the only thing that's left for the town and village courts are landlord tenant cases, local ordinance cases, small claims cases, and those things could easily be. Small claims cases can already be brought to city court, and the landlord tenant cases, they would just have to make some changes to move those couple of cases if they wanted to, and then you wouldn't have town and village court. Now it's not going to happen right away, but it could happen over the next 5 to 10 years, and if we were to expend a substantial amount of money, the estimates that we had were between $1.5 million and $2.5 million, I think. If we were to spend that money, and then they eliminate the court, it's not the best use of the people's resources, I don't think. I think we're better off to focus on trying to work with the village. I had already gotten a grant to put a lift in the center of the village of the Tracy, and for some reason the mayor changed his mind. He said that they said it was going to hurt the integrity of the historic nature of the building or something like that. But Kate Johns drew up these plans. They were just sketches, but she drew up these plans where you'd be able to build a small addition on the outside of the building, on the side of the building, with an elevator and a stairway in it, and you would be able to make the second floor handicap accessible. And they're really nice plans. I don't know if any of you've seen the drawings, but it's a really great idea, and if there was a way that we could put pressure on the village to do that, it would resolve the issues of handicap accessibility and the court not being accessible. I don't know if you have anything more to add, Mike.
Well, I agree with everything you said. The other plan that's being discussed is that they would establish regional courts for arraignments. And so Chatham might be one, and then Greenport and Hudson, and some southern towns, and then judges would be on call for the regional arraignments, but it's not clear they're going to go in that direction. And as James said, this process is really for streamlining and making it easier for the public defender and the defense bar, not necessarily for the defendants, because if you're only going to have one arraignment a day, that means people who today are arrested, they'll call one of us or another local judge. We'll go in and we'll arraign them relatively quickly. Under this scenario, defendants could be sitting in a holding cell for hours. So it's not necessarily something that we think is a good idea or is fair to the public, but at least we hear this drumbeat, if you will. So I think, our view is it would not be prudent to spend a lot of money until we see what direction they go and what plan they end up adopting.
So there was talk about, Bob Linville, as the public defender, was talking about getting a grant from the state that they would be able to do arraignments in 6 different town courts. So Chatham, Kinloch, Hudson, no, not Germantown,
Greenport?
no, I think it's Claverack, and I forget what the other ones were, but the bigger courts in the area. But Bob Linville has recently told some people in the Office of Court Administration that that's really just not going to work, because he can't get someone to work the hours that would be necessary. He was going to put a plan in place that they would hire 2 public defenders who would work from 11 o'clock at night until 6 o'clock in the morning. And they would have to attend all of these arraignments, if there were any arraignments that would occur. They would hold them in those 6 courts. But it's still not an easy thing for someone to do.
What a job.
Yeah, right. Can you imagine you graduate from law school and you say, hey mom, I got a job working 11 to 6 in the morning, doing
6 towns.
So, and really the most important part of what the defense counsel does at the arraignments is that they talk with regard to the issue of bail. And, they protect the defendant's rights with regard to setting bail. They could easily do things about that. They could change the statute which says under what circumstances you set bail. We could just not require bail on most offenses. We could just say, we're not going to require bail on misdemeanors. We're not going to require bail on most cases. And other states do the same thing. New Jersey has statutes like that. Those things would be more protective of the defendant's rights. But that's really beyond what the scope of what you wanted to hear from us on. And that's really that whether we should stay in the Tracy or whether we should go to some other facility. And we've talked about having courts at firehouses, and the problem with that is aside from the cost of setting things up, you still have the security issue with regard to the clerks, and the clerks would be there all by themselves, and there'd be nobody there all day long. You have there's an extensive cost to any of these things because you have to go through the Office of Court Administration, and it would all have to be secure, and it would have to be, you have to have certain kinds of windows and doors and bathrooms and everything like that. Plus, on court night, we have 100 people in the court, and so there's a lot of people. So you have to have a place where everybody can park. It's on court night there, it's packed. When we first get there, it's standing room only. So.
John, okay. Thank you for coming. Do you want to add anything?
No, I'm right in line with James.
We're very lucky to have Joan as our clerk. She's amazing, and we have no idea what we would do if we didn't have her, because I've sat in some of the other courts. I know the problems that the village is having with their court, and we're very, very fortunate to have Joan as our clerk. And Sandy before her did a great job. Sandy was fantastic also.
Good.
Do we have exclusive use of that courtroom? It sounds like we don't.
Unless there's a party that they want to lease it out to on a weekend.
So when we rent it, it doesn't give us exclusive use, even though we have the bench there, and we have materials and equipment.
What do you mean exclusive use?
Well,
We don't have use of, they use it for other events.
Yeah,
They rent it out for other
When
events.
we don't occupy the room, it's used for other things.
I wasn't aware that they rented it out.
Right.
And one solution would be, to James's point, we could ask that the village require any parties that rent it to get liability insurance.
We did.
I believe they did it.
We did.
Sometimes they do. They're very lax about it. I mean, they've had events there where they have bouncy parties and stuff like this. They've had all kinds of things, and I've talked to them about it, that it's
Well,
not the
Gary said
appropriate
because
space.
we're tenants and not landlords.
That's just not correct. Like Grand Central Terminal, the state does not own Grand Central Terminal. It's a long-term lease from Penn Central, and it's done all the time. And you can get indemnified on those kinds of things. They might not like to do it, but if they're asking us to indemnify them when they're bringing up the tenants, that just doesn't make sense. It's just any money is worth its salt and pepper. But that's beyond the scope of this discussion.
Yeah, we'll talk this out.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming. I think it makes, I just heard the scenario last month from James about what good plans might be for the justice courts in the county, so thought it was important for you all to hear it.
Yeah, happy statewide.
So this is a statewide proposal, and Judge Kokoma, who's the administrative judge for all the town and village judges throughout the state, is charged under the statute with the responsibility of implementing this program. So they had a stakeholders meeting in December, and they met with a lot of the various units of state government, whether it's the public defenders associations, the police chiefs, the troopers, you just go down the line, everybody that has anything to do. And I don't really think this, I really don't think this is in the best interest of defendants, because what's going to happen is that you're going to have people arrested. Say one of your kids is arrested on a DWI charge. Well, instead of coming into town and village court, and they go before the judge who's elected in your own community, and that judge saying, well, I know this kid, or I know where they live, I know they've lived here their whole lives, and releasing them to their parents, they're going to be brought down to Hudson. They'll be arraigned in Hudson, and they won't go before a judge until the arraignment part. So if you get arrested on a say Friday afternoon, and the next arraignment part isn't until Saturday morning, they'll spend the night in a holding cell. They could end up spending as much as if you get arrested on a Saturday morning at say 9 o'clock, and the arraignment part is on Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, and they did not process in time for that arraignment part, and then the next arraignment part is Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, they could end up spending overnight in jail, as opposed to they come before Mike or I, and we decide that there's no reason to set bail, and they're released in your own town. Someone comes, picks them up, or they could even walk if they don't live far. If you're released down in Hudson, it's like, well, now how do what do you do?
Plus, you have to think about who they might be put with in that holding cell for 12 hours or more. So, local judges are not supportive of this, but it's a state law. How the counties implement is still to be determined. It looks like it will be decided county by county, but who knows? Frankly, I don't see why they don't allow the public offenders to Skype for arraignments or take advantage.
There's things that they could do, but this is the way that they've seemed like they're passing.
So,
Just on the one piece, we cannot let them walk we have to, if they're released, we have to release them to a sober party, or we have to get them back to their residence. We can't let them walk, especially if they've had anything to drink at all. The sheriff's office is still gonna be responsible if they go walk off and get hit by a car leaving wherever it is that they're arraigned at, so.
And in the middle of the night, a lot of times, if it's local, you don't mind. Sometimes the sheriffs will take people home and stuff like that, even though maybe they're not supposed to do that, or, you know, they'll kind of bend things a little bit because it's someone who lives in the area or something. But usually someone's able to come pick them up. But under this circumstance, you can't have the police, the sheriffs and the state police driving people all over the county at the end of the night. So they'll end up having to stay until someone does come and pick them up.
Okay.
Any questions?
Sounds like a terrible plan.
Is that just your agency, or is that?
I mean, I can't speak for the other agencies, but, I mean, somebody still has to be responsible for them. It's just, if we bring them back to the sheriff's office, I have to release them to a sober party in the lobby. I can't just let somebody who's, especially if they, you know, I guess it doesn't really matter what they blew, but if they're aggravated DWI and they're blowing 1.8 or higher in the twos, I have to make sure that that person gets turned over to somebody who's sober, is gonna get them home safe, or I then have to make sure they get home safe.
Right.
Those are local policies, so those are policies that the local
Right, I wasn't
agencies
sure.
would put in place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, but I don't know if state, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if state police could just be like, see ya, I don't,
Right. That's what I'm
you know, everybody
And
plays,
sometimes-
everybody plays by a little bit different set of rules.
Right, and sometimes they do. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone who's arrested because they're intoxicated.
Right.
They can be arrested for some other reason. They can be picked up on a warrant, and then they're ROR'd, and...
Well, in that case, really, to be honest, it's just the alcohol related thing.
Right, so they're on their
Yeah,
own, so, you know...
If I bring somebody for an arraignment for whatever, and the judge RORs them, I think they can come out in the parking lot and stare at me like a lost puppy dog and want to ride, and I can just drive away. Not saying that that's always the case. If,
Right,
you know,
right.
if they're decent with me and I don't have to go too far, maybe I'll give them a ride back home. But.
Well, thank you all for coming, appreciate it.
Thanks for hearing us out.
Yes.
Take care.
I've got Dan that wants to give his report, so I'd like to have Dan come up and give his report.
We'll give you a lot of information in a short amount of time, but here's a cliff notes on it, so you don't have to remember it all. Maria had asked me to present to the town board at some point, just kind of give you an idea of what I do and what are the issues before the assessor. And so here I am. First of all, how do you become an assessor in New York State? There's a certification process of 8 courses you have to take, and then every year you have to have at least 12 credits of continuing education. There's an ethics course that you have to take regularly. And so I've done all the training courses. Some of them are offered through the state, some of them also are offered through appraisal, education. There's one in Albany that I've gone to a number of times. And so basically you learn how to do the assessing process, and then you get updated. The last couple that I took were solar and not-for-profit, so which are, you know, two of the big things that affect this area. And I think you guys have talked about solar. That's an up-and-coming whatever it is. I'm not sure. Now, what do I do? What do I spend my time doing? The charge from New York State is that all properties must be assessed at an equitable percentage of full market value. What does that mean in English? Basically, I've got to make sure that the properties are assessed equitably across the town for tax purposes. New York State's standard is full market value, what it sells for on the open market. I'll talk more about that later because that's an interesting issue, especially in our area. I spend a lot of time with sales. I keep track of all real estate transactions in town of Chatham. That 90 number there from July 16 to June of 2017 is residential sales. There's actually been about 120 real estate transactions, vacant land, commercial stuff, but the 90 is just residential. And all those have to be entered into the computer program, and I have to determine whether they're valid or not. Now, valid ones are the ones that the state uses then to determine our level of assessment and our equalization rate. So I've got to determine, every time I get a RP 5217, which is the state's form for a sale, usually they say it's valid. Whoever fills those out, they just get it down and check it through. They're not all valid. And part of my job is to figure out whether they are or not, and then I'll let the state, okay, this is valid, this isn't. And because that makes a difference then in what our level of assessment is and what our heat rate is. And so every sale that comes across, I also check the MLS information. And I do that for a couple of reasons. One is it helps me to figure out its validity. The other is it tells me whether that sale price is based on the inventory that I have or if there's something else. Because in the MLS I say, okay, this is a 5-bedroom house with 3,000 square foot, and I've got it as a 3-bedroom with 1,800 square feet, and so then I'll make changes based on that. There's what's called welcome stranger law in New York State that I can't change an assessment based on a higher sale number than what I have assessed for. I can change it if there's a change in inventory, which I do. I'll regularly check the inventory, again, using the MLS information or other information I have and say, okay, there's actually more bedrooms, there's more square foot. And I'll change it based on that. But I can't just change it based on the sale. So if we have something assessed for $600,000, sells for $2.85 million, I can't just move it to $2.85 million without a specific reason.
At some point, can you?
If I change the other ones that are associated with that. So it can't be arbitrary. And that makes it a challenge. Now, the reverse is not true though. If a property sells for under what I've assessed for, I have to change it. If I don't, they can take it to court and they'll win every time. So it's typically if somebody comes to me and say, I bought this under what's assessed for, I'll move it to whatever percentage we are because it's not worth the fight and I lose. So that's an interesting dichotomy for sure because they sell way high, you can't move it. And again, we'll talk about sales a little bit later on. But and then for everybody that buys new in Chatham, we send out a new owner packet. Who we are, what our hours are, information about exemptions, whatever, we send that out to all new people in town. I also have listed under pre-sales. I got a lot of calls from people who are considering buying in Chatham. In fact, I was dealing with one today. They'll want to know, okay, if I buy it for X amount of dollars, what are my taxes going to be? What exemptions could I possibly get? What if I buy it under the assessed value? What if I buy it over the assessed value? How are my taxes going to change? And so that also includes people who are going to build, or people who are going to put an addition on, or build, some other improvement to their property. They'll contact me. What's it going to cost me? And so I've got a couple different programs that I've set up. Here's what's going to cost you. I'll give them a rough estimate. Sometimes it'll be a pretty official number, so that if they actually move in, then that'll be what their assessment becomes, or if they build, that'll be what their assessment becomes. I'll work it out.
And that includes the school tax?
That includes everything, every tax, school, town, county, library. So I let them know what it's going to cost them if they move into Chatham or if they build. And I found that to be really helpful. That's something new that we've added in the last 2 years. And I found that people were saying, hey, I have no idea what it was going to cost me. So I've set up some programs and take the time to walk people through. Usually that knowledge is helpful so that, hey, obviously people do things, they don't contact me, I don't know, and then they get a surprise one way or the other. But and I found the more information they have, the better off it is. And then there's inventory changes all the time. Building permits, I'm looking forward to that new program that we're planning to implement so I can get more information, and that'll make that more of a seamless process. Exemptions are what I also spend a lot of time doing. Typically in a year we have 450 exemptions that I have to personally look through and deal with. There are ag exemptions, you can see listed out there, enhanced star, disability, whatever. A lot of them are tied to income. So I know what most older people in town make. Which is one of the reasons why I talk about keeping it local. Same thing from the court. You don't necessarily want that information spread all over the county or given to somebody you don't know. But older people, if they have a face that they know they're dealing with year after year, there's a trust factor that, hey, this person knows how much I make and they know what I spend on this or whatever. So I keep track of all that, that's all secured, but they do, that is a requirement from the state. I have to know how much they make in order to give them various exemptions. The enhanced star is based on that, the cedar exemption is based on that, the ag exemptions are based on that. So it's, I spend a lot of time with exemptions, they all have to be entered in the system. New exemptions, let's say a not-for-profit or an ag, takes hours. We gotta go through all the thing, make sure they have the paperwork in order, it's a back and forth process. So that's a lot of what I spend time on. I also spend a fair amount of time on grievances. Typically people don't come in and say, hey, I think I'm under-assessed, what can you do? They say I'm over-assessed. What they really mean is my taxes are too high, can you do anything about it? And I've got a number there, 400 grievers. Of the last 400 people that came to see me on grievance, I've set up a spreadsheet. I take off their land value, I take off their improvements, the garages and that kind of thing, and I look at the square feet of the house, how much is it worth? And I compare it based on 400 different properties. And in Chatham, it's about $82, $83 per square foot for one is medium, one is the average. For the last 400 people that come in, and that's what their house is worth, let's say, on the assessment roll. And so it gives me a pretty broad comparison. Somebody comes in, obviously there's some that are much higher than that, newer homes, and better quality homes, there's some that are lower than that. But that gives me if somebody comes in and say, I'm over-assessed, if I run into that program, I could tell pretty much, no, you're not, or yes, you are, and then let's talk about it. And a lot of times it's just a matter of giving people information. Somebody came to me, they just bought a house, and say, I think it's over-assessed. I said, let's look at the numbers. And I said, okay, here's what compares to 400 people in the town. Does this make sense? Yeah, okay, I know they're not the case. And they'll leave. Some people are like, no, I'm over-assessed. Or I'll say, hey, you're over-assessed. Let's talk about it. What's fair? 99.9% of people leave my office at least understand. They don't necessarily have to agree with me, but they understand. And typically they come to agreement. If they don't, they have obviously a legal process to go through. They go to the bar, Court of Assessment Review. They can go to, after the bar, they go to SCAR or Supreme Court. And I'll help them put together the paperwork. Okay, this is what you got to do in order to fight me, as it were. This isn't I'm taking it personally, but I'll help them to walk through the process. And right now, the only one that we're dealing with in that case is Krellin. Krellin never came to see me personally. They've never talked to me personally. I've just gotten stuff through the bar. But I talked to the attorney about it, and we were able to at least put the burden of proof back on them rather than on us, because they had done no work to date. But now, if they're going to continue anymore, they've got to get an appraisal and spend some time and money figuring out that really it's. And we had put together hours worth of work. I worked with a guy in the county a couple of years ago when they did it. And okay, this is what it's worth, this is why it's worth this, and using, again, a broad spectrum, not just Chatham, but a broad spectrum of commercial properties. So again, who knows what's got still to be determined. There's a fair amount of communication I have with the county and with the state. There's a calendar that I've got to follow every year, one piece I have to post on the newspaper. And so that's kind of what I do. Now, I said to talk a little bit more about sales. Let me just give you some sales statistics, which makes my job a challenge. Of those 90 real estate transactions that are residential, 11 of them are foreclosures. So in Chatham, and that's from the last year, from July 2016 to today. 12% of those real estate transactions are foreclosures in Chatham. It's a pretty high number. And it's, I think in the last month or two, it's been 4. It seems like that's increasing. Now, some of those are then bought, the banks will put them on the market, they're bought, and they'll go back on legitimate people are living in there and they're improving it, but that's a pretty high number, and I think that number's increased based on just what I'm seeing. Of those 49 valid ones, 18 are New York City area purchases, and 6 more are out of state, like Texas, California. And so, what does that mean? Of those out of area, and there's other out of area, you know, it's all in Detroit, I don't count those. Those out of area usually coming from bigger money places like New York City. 49% of sales that are valid in Chatham are coming from a much higher income area. Now, what does that do? Well, it drives up prices. It drives up, you know, taxes in one sense. There's a change there, there's an effect. So remember, we're based on full market value. So if the prices are being driven up, basically they're saying your properties in town are worth much more than they're saying they are. But it's based on a number that sometimes is not this, it's based on somebody else's economic scheme. And so I try to consistently balance that as I'm looking at it, say, okay, who bought this? How much did they pay? And I dealt with a couple, actually I think it was 3 of them this year. For instance, you guys know Locust Street. It's a property I had assessed for $137,000. It sold for $330,000. Now, I'm like, I almost fell in my chair when I said, who bought a place for $330,000 on Locust Street? Now, the one at the top sold for $400,000 also this year. But that's a super place that's inside fixed up place. Not the way top, that was $920,000, but the brown one you might have seen, the tan. Now, so I drove by them. I drive by every day. I was like, what's this? And I'm like, what were they thinking? And so then again, I looked at the inventory and I made some changes. The person who bought it called me up and says, why are you changing my assessment and all? So I said, come talk to me. So they came in. It was a girl from New York City. And she goes, now you have to understand, she goes, I bought my first apartment, studio apartment, 1 room in New York City for $330,000. I think I'm getting a great deal. She goes, then I come up here, and all of a sudden it's not so great. I realized I paid way too much, and I got killed, but there's nothing I could do about it. And so, you know, you take a situation like that, and the person's worth $330,000, mine's worth at least $500,000 right around the corner. And it's, you know, when it's like, okay, as an assessor, what do you do with it? Do you say, okay, Locust Street, you have $400,000, you have $330,000, do you also change all the values on Locust Street? Because it's now super low in Chatham, or is there some other factors you have to consider when you're making those changes? So that's just you know, something to think about in terms of what's really happening in the assessment arena. Now, in terms of the equalization rate right now, we're at 85%. Most of the towns around are going to 100%. In order to go to 100%, we need to go to either get a full townwide reval, which costs a huge amount of money and takes a bit of time and all. Another thing that the county's been doing is what's called a non-reappraisal reassessment. Basically, they take your inventory, they run the numbers on it, doesn't take that long, and they change everything based on that. To date, I have fought that. I said, that's not fair. I said, we have not looked at every property in town, and we don't know whether the inventories are up to date across town, so to do that non-reappraisal approach is unfair. And so they've accepted that point. Now, at some point, we probably should have an inventory check, which would include mailers. And typically with mailers, you get some back, you get some. People who have less than the mailer says, they're definitely going to respond and say, no, not this on the property. But you don't necessarily hit it if there's more. But you can do mailers, plus every property should be visited. And you can check the inventory, check the condition of the house, and that sort of thing. And again, that takes time and money.
Would a separate company come in and do that?
That could be done through me and through the county. The county has an inventory person, a data gatherer that they hire out for, I think it's $70 per parcel. But that's something to think about. Now, another piece of that, I may retire from teaching in a year, or a little more than a year, which would then give you more time to do something like that. You know, so that's, again, just something to put in the hopper.
In 2018 or
It would be 2018. At the end. One of the school years, I'm still working with the retirement board here when I'm eligible. I'm too young to retire. There's a lot of young children, but I won't retire completely, but I may retire from teaching. So I've given you a lot of information in a hurry here. I certainly told you everything, but are there any questions that you guys have as far as?
Great, but very concise.
not a boring job. It's interesting.
Well, thank you very much, Dan.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you know, as we build budget, though,
That's what
you know, if you can, well, let's do it this way. Look at it and say, okay, I'm gonna get to 100% this year, this is what I gotta do.
Right,
Give us a number.
okay.
You know, that way, at least we'll have an idea to what we have to look at.
And it doesn't happen
To
over,
me-
it doesn't happen over a year. It happens over usually a couple of years
Right.
at least. You know, you got an inventory gathering process, and then you've got, you know, what the numbers and all that sort of thing.
When did we last have townwide appraisal? You know, I mean, has it ever been?
It's been a long time. Before, one of the reasons I ran for office originally is because I needed a job to back in for my taxes. They had done a partial one, and that, I've been in office now 12, 13 years, so it's been a long time, and that wasn't a full one. So I don't know when the last, anybody here know when the last full?
No.
And typically when you get an outside company, unless they're familiar with the area, it ends up being a disaster. So that's why if you have somebody that knows the area and, you know, in combination with the county, it's cheaper and it can be much more accepted by the community.
You've done well to get it to 85%. I mean, it was, I think, when you took over
67.
60 or something.
And I think the incremental thing is easier on the taxpayer.
It is.
But if we got to get there, it was supposed to be 100 when it was 67, whatever it was.
Well, the first thing that a buyer says today, any realtor is, what are the taxes?
Absolutely. And when they look
Not
at,
that we are the biggest part of the tax.
when they look at Chatham's tax, they're like,
And that's why you're getting so many telephones.
yeah.
That's why we're lucky to have you instead of going to the county when you first thought of doing it.
Oh, I think that's, yeah, that's certainly, dealing with somebody local is, I think it's better off. It's basically, agree with what James said about the court, I think it's nicer to deal with somebody local. We'll go to the county-wide at some point, I don't know. At this point, the county's not ready to, they'd have to do some changes to go to county-wide.
Yeah, there's a lot of what ifs there.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming.
Sure.
Okay, so I think what we will
Blind.
do is move into the amending of the town 2019 comprehensive plan to include the Chatham source water protection plan. And there are a number of things that we have to address in order to comply with making the amendment to the comp plan. So we're going to have to review the full environmental assessment form, part one, prior to the public hearing. So Bob, you all have copies of it, but Bob has brought it so that it can come up on the screen. And if you would like to go through it, Bob?
Okay, so in review, remember, this is the source water report that was commissioned by the county, and we received a very nice review a couple months ago, and we agreed that we should amend the comprehensive plan and have this source water report in it, because it tells us where the water is in our town. So in order to do that, we have to go through a secret review. And secret reviews are tedious. They have gotten much longer, but we should be able to get through this pretty quickly. We'll have to go through first part one, and then we have to, once we get part one done, and if there's any changes that need to be done, then we make note of that. And then we need to make a motion to move this to the county planning board. So at that point, we can open the public hearing. So this is what the secret form looks like. And it's been, Nan Stolzenberg helped. She filled out much of it. I added to it. So the good news is, because this is just a report on the source water, it's not a project. You're not digging ground. You're not making changes. You're just putting a report in to amend the comprehensive plan. So because of that, we're lucky. We then only have to complete the first couple sections and the last section with a narrative. So this beginning stuff is just who we are, where we are, descriptions, New York Water Association, has prepared a source water plan for the town of Chatham. The misspellings have been corrected, by the way. I just didn't have time to scan them again. Town board desires to incorporate this new plan as an appendix to its comprehensive plan. The rest is contact information, and then we get to the stuff that we have to start paying a little attention to. So this is the first section that we have to look at. And we have to look at the government entity. Well, it's the town board, so that's why this is checked. City, town, or planning board or commission, no, this is a town board responsibility. And it goes down, county agencies, yes, because we have to have the county planning board do what is known as a 239M review. And then no regional agencies. We're not a coastal resource, so we don't have to worry about that. Not yet, anyways. Then this is the best news for everything. Is that this yes right here means we get to skip the next 13 pages. So, but so do any municipality adopted comprehensive plan include the site where the proposed action will be located? Yes. If yes, does this comprehensive plan include specific recommendations for a site where the proposed action will be located? Yes. Is it a brownfield? No. Okay, is the proposed action locally, wholly, or partially within the area? Yes. And if there is a plan that needs to be identified, and we do have Town of Chatham Agricultural and Farmland Protection Plan. Okay, so that's the good news. Now we get to deal a little bit here. We have to identify our zoning areas, so there's a yes, and those are our current zoning areas. Is the use permitted? Well, yeah, it's the water. Zoning change request as part of a proposed action. No, this is not due to somebody building something. This is a report being added as a resource. So we have to identify some other stuff. The school districts. Many people don't know that we have 4 school districts in the town of Chatham. We also have to identify our law enforcement protection, and then all the fire companies. And then we have one park, Common Community Park. Okay, now we get to skip all these pages. This is the best part of this whole video. So if you were a building, like you're putting in a building, that's going to be a big deal. You'd be answering all this stuff. We are not. Okay, so this is the only other part that we'll have to do, but first we have to go to F, which is the narrative. And this was sent to everybody. This gives all the background. I don't want to sit here and read it all. I think you have read it. Does anybody have, I can leave it up. Or should I read it for the record? I'm in a good voice tonight.
Go ahead.
All right, in 2009, the town of Chatham.
You're actually going to read it? If it's not part of the record, well, I don't think I have to read all that. If it's part of the written record.
Well, if folks can read, then I'll just give our time, take a little time as we go through it. Description of action, there's a, explains what we're doing. Environmental setting, it describes that this was addressed somewhat in the comprehensive plan, but this is something that is needed to help support the comprehensive plan. Environmental impacts, there are really an impact on land. There's a little the report. This is like where you get into the important stuff as far as that report. That it doesn't cause environmental impacts, but it does identify the sensitivity, the recharge locations, the critical areas in the town, and it provides a guide where we have to be careful with growth because we may not have enough water in those areas. So it allows us to address problems in the future. So that's why that's that part of the narrative. Impact on water, well, it's the whole idea is to avoid problems, so it has no impact. Impact on air, no, it has to do with the water. Impact on plants and animals, it does have an indirect and positive impact on the wetlands because they're identified, and it helps prevent development in those areas that could impact the water, the source water. Agricultural resources, offers opportunities for the land users in the current farms understand what water they have and what best way to manage it in their operations. And see, I'll give you the cliff notes. Aesthetic resources, this is all a form that you have to answer for seeker. So that's why you have to do all this stuff. It protects the water source. Impact on historic or archaeological? No. Open space, well, this one is kind of important because it does, by identifying the water source, it helps conserve the open spaces and allows you to protect your water sources. So it allows you to identify what would be appropriate development in certain areas. No areas were identified as critical environmental areas. There's no impact on transportation. There's no impact on energy, noise, public health, no adverse impact. So we're trying to look what can cause a problem. And this does not cause a problem. It helps prevent the problem. Impact and growth on the community. We've kind of discussed this all along the way. It does allow you to grow appropriately. So the conclusion is probably the best part. The conclusion are no adverse environmental impacts identified and only positive beneficial impacts for the town. Town board finds that adoption of the source water protection plan into the comprehensive plan is the best environmental and economic interest of the town. As such, the board concludes that the adoption of the new plan to have no adverse environmental impacts, and therefore the environmental impact statement will not be prepared. So that's why that whole section we skipped over, that just gave the narrative as to why we skipped over all that stuff. Okay. That has to wait. So now, time to open up public hearing.
I'd like to open up the public hearing at 6:55. Does anyone have any comments relative to the amending of the comprehensive plan to include the water protection source?
Just I have one question. Does this actually get incorporated as part of when the zoning is incorporated, or is this totally separate now?
Yeah, it's right now.
Okay.
I think becomes an addendum to the comprehensive plan, so like, there's part 1 and part 2. Part 2 has all the appendices that are the support documents. It becomes part of that.
The ag document.
The ag doc, it's like the ag document, exactly, right.
Okay. I'll just say, I think anything we add to the zoning that creates sensible growth and pays attention to resources in the town is something to pay attention to. I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
Okay, we'll close the public hearing at 6:56. No more comments.
I hate to do this to you, but we'll go to part 2. Yep. Here, you want to read the tips for completing part 2? All right, let's just get to the run of it. And when I go through this, if you have a question or you want to raise a question, now's the time to do it. So, first one, impact on land. Proposed action may involve construction on or physical alteration of the land surface of the proposed site. That is a no. So if we say no, we move on to the next section. Everybody okay with that?
Aye.
Yeah. Next, impact on geological features. The proposed action may result in modification of destruction of or inhibit the access or unusual landforms, cliffs, dunes, etc. And that's a no. I hope everybody's okay with that. However, here's our only yes. Impacts on surface water. The proposed action may affect one or more wetlands or other water surface bodies. Example, streams, rivers. So we're going to say yes here because of this one, E. The proposed action may create turbidity in a water body either from upland erosion, runoff, or disturbing bottom sediments. And we're going to say, well, yes, it could happen, but no, it's very small impact if it happens. It's a kind of cover your butt situation.
Did you have a specific area in mind when you decided to check that?
No, it's just a general broad protection. Because the plan is not going to cause a problem, but just as a protection, we need to identify that water can always, change, and can't depend on the plan to. Yeah, we just have to identify that as this can happen. Impact on groundwater. Proposed action may result in additional use of groundwater or may have potential contaminants. This is a no. Impact on flooding. Proposed action may result in development on lands subject to flooding, not developing lands. That is a no. Impacts on air. We've been through this. So be happy. Look at all this stuff. Impact on plants and animals. Proposed action may result in loss of flora, fauna. No. Impact on agricultural resources. Well, this is another one we get to say yes to. And why? It's down here. Other impacts. Some areas need protection may be located in farmlands. Okay. So that's why we have to identify that one. Maybe it's a small impact or no impact. Impact on aesthetic resources. This is a no. Impact on historic and archaeological resources. No. Impact on open space and recreation. This again is a no. Impact on critical environmental areas. No. No impact. Impact on transportation. No. Energy.